I spent the last 10 years going from college dropout with ADHD to scaling my business to over $75 million. And I've put together what I'm calling the $75 million video. This is all of the lessons I learned. This is the least sexy video you're probably gonna ever watch. This is not theory. This is not what could work. This is not what I learned in college. This is what I learned over a decade making massive money and massive growth in my business. So this might be the most important video that you've ever watched. And if you just watch one video on how to hit your goals, watch this one. Start at the top with your yearly goals. All right, now I'm going into this under the assumption that you've got some clarity on your long-term vision, your 3-year vision, whatever that looks like for you. You gotta know where you're going and what's most important to you. For me, my big goal is I wanna run a $1 billion company that changes the world, and that long after I'm off this earth, it's still here making an impact. Right, so with that in mind, now I'm going to start at the top with your yearly goals. So at the end of every December, I do 3 things. Okay, number 1, I pick my top 3 goals for the next year. Number 2, I choose a theme or intention. And number 3, I list the 20 people that I want to deepen relationships with. So first, before I even get to these 3 things, I'm reflecting on the previous year. So what were the wins? What were the milestones that I'm celebrating? What are the lessons that I learned? What are the things that I want to do more of? What are the things that I want to stop doing? Right, I create a long list of stop doings because in order to raise the level of your yes, you got to raise the level of your no. But once I've done that, we go back to these 3 things, right? So number 1, I pick my top goals for the year. Now, a few years ago, I realized this may sound dumb to you, but I realized that there's a difference between Chandler and self-publishing.com. Shocker. There's a difference between you and your business. Now, it used to be that all of my goals, you could just read my goals and they would read the same as my business goals, right? Because I was my business. But then I realized, hey, these 2 things have different identities, so I need to treat them as such. So now what I do is I say, hey, what are my top 3 personal goals for the year? And what are my top 3 business goals for the year? Now, you can't have more than 3 to 5. If you've got 10 or 15 goals, you've got no goals, right? You're not going to hit any of them. So you got to keep them short and you got to order them in order of importance. Now, you're going to notice this is a common theme as we go through all the steps in this process. Order them in order of importance. So start with your top 3 goals, business and personal, then move to your theme or intention. I love this. I know some people think this is dumb, but a theme or intention, this is like your word, your ethos for the year. So the first time I did this, I realized that, hey, I'm just a bad leader. Like I had not learned leadership and this was the biggest bottleneck in my business. So I said, hey, I'm going to obsess over leadership. That was my word for the year. So that year I read dozens of leadership books. I'm actively focused on and learning about leadership. Another year it was developing others. This year it's cowboy up. And so I have this theme that is it's what I draw inspiration from, and it's the theme of my year, right? This is probably also woven into your goals for the year, but start with the goals, then the theme. And then the third one is really important, and that's listing 20 people you want to deepen relationships with. Now, if you're anything like me, I've moved around a bunch of times. I've got a bunch of people in my life, and as your business gets bigger, your Rolodex gets longer, and you just sometimes get overwhelmed with all the emails, the texts, all the things. And so what's helpful for me is I had to eventually just write this down. Hey, who's most important? Who do I want to deepen relationships with? I list out those 20 people, and that's how I know throughout the year who to prioritize relationship building with. So now that you've got your yearly goals, we move into number 2, which is narrowing the focus and creating your quarterly goals. All right, quarterly is where clarity compounds. So what I like to do is I like to pick one key constraint. All right, they talk about this in the book, The One Thing. They call this the lead domino. It's the one thing that if I solve this one thing, it'll make everything else easier and necessary. All right, so this isn't fluff. This is what needs to happen in this 90 days to hit my yearly goals. All right, what needs to happen? Now, maybe you've been through this process. Maybe you've read a book like Traction or Scaling Up or whatever else for your business, but I recommend that you do this in both sides, right? So you do this for your business and you do this personally. If you want a structure for this, just Google one-page strategic plan from Scaling Up. It's really simple. It's deadly effective, but we got to move from, okay, this is yearly to now this is quarterly. So a question to ask here is what must happen in the first 90 days to achieve my yearly goals? Now, again, we're going no more than 3 things or no more than 5 things in order of importance. All right, so think about this and say, hey, what are the key constraints? What's the bottleneck? What has to happen in order for me to hit my yearly goals? And then you break that down, you set those as your quarterly goals. Now, this is where the magic starts. All right, this process is how I condense most people's quarters into my months. Now, this is something that I think a lot of people they kind of skip over, they overlook. I don't know anyone who's as obsessed with monthly goals as I am. Right? Maybe you followed my posts every month on whether I'm hitting my goals or not, but monthly goals, they've been a rhythm that I've implemented for the last decade. So I have an accountability partner. We meet every single month and we cover our monthly goals. So the monthly goals, this is where the magic happens. So most people obsess over their yearly goals, their New Year's resolutions, all that stuff, but then it gets lost in the sauce on a monthly basis. Visibility is key. That's the first thing. You need to set, obviously we're going to follow all the principles that we did with the quarterly goal framework, but we're going to do that and we're going to say, all right, what needs to happen this month in order for me to hit my quarterly goals, in order for me to hit my yearly goals? All right, so we're really drilling down and saying, hey, what's most important? How do I move the needle? Now, this goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway. These goals need to be smart. All right, they need to be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. So in other words, if I show someone else, let's say if I show a 5-year-old your monthly goals, right? Can they tell me if you hit them? And this is something that even leading a team, and I've led teams for, over a decade, and I've worked with people for years and years and years on this framework, even still to this day, even for myself, I find myself having to go back to this and saying, hold up, that's a little too vague. So don't let yourself off the hook here, right? They need to be specific. They need to be measurable. And it needs to be the most important thing in order of importance, right? So with all those things in mind, I want to create these monthly goals and I'm going to say, all right, this is the target for the month. And then, like I said, they need to be visible. I don't know if you're anything like me, but out of sight, out of mind, right? So what I do is I have my monthly goals in my office on my desk, right next to my desk where I see them every single day. You need to get serious about your monthly goals. You need to start setting your monthly goals. This requires you to look ahead at your calendar, look ahead at your priorities, block things off on your calendar, and then make sure that you implement. And that moves into the next piece, which is weekly execution. This is where the rubber really meets the road. And so the first kind of keystone habit here that you need to implement is you need to have a weekly planning session. Now, for some people, they like to do this end of day Friday. For others, they like to do it Sunday evening. If you're lazy and a slacker, maybe you do it Monday morning. All right, but you need to have a clear framework and success for the week. All right, if you don't get ahead of your week's going to get ahead of you. So the question to ask at the start is say, all right, I've got my monthly goals right here by my desk. Where am I at on these monthly goals versus where should I be? And what do I need to accomplish this week to stay on track or to get on track? All right. And so this is where, when we think about monthly goals, there's some stuff in there, monthly, quarterly, yearly, whatever. There's some stuff in there that's like, hey, I have to do X, Y, Z in the first week of the month. Otherwise, I have no chance at hitting it. All right. So now all of a sudden we're planning ahead. We're looking ahead. We're focused on the most important things, the key constraints, all that stuff at the start of the month. Right. So that might be your week 1 goals. And then we're using that to make weekly progress. All right. So same framework here. So this is maybe getting a little bit old, getting a little bit boring, but the formula works if you work it and if you're consistent with it. Right. So I would just ask the question, what are the 3 things that you need to happen this week to keep you on track? All right. No more than 3 to 5 things in order of importance. And once you set it down, now all of a sudden I'm at my computer. I got my monthly goals right here. I got my weekly goals right here. And I'm using that to prioritize my days, right? But I've got it visible and I can actually look ahead at my week and say, okay, Tuesday is where I'm going to make some real big progress on goal number 1. Looks like Thursday afternoon, maybe that's where I can do goal number 3, 4, or 5 or whatever, like the less important stuff, but it helps you kind of pair your calendar on a weekly basis with your weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly goals. So don't overthink it. Prioritize, set weekly goals. So at the end of every day, I do a 5 to 10 minute planning session. All right, I've got a whole separate video on this. I call it my perfect day formula and my end of day checklist, right? So at the end of the day, I'm closing loops. I'm wrapping up what's unfinished. I want to have a clear mind going out of work, right? That's going to help me have better time in the evenings, and that's going to help me get better sleep, quite frankly. But so I'm kind of clearing the deck, if you will, but I'm also planning tomorrow, hour by hour, using my calendar and using my weekly goals. All right, now I know some of you, this level of structure and discipline sounds just like the worst thing you've ever heard. Right? But I promise you, as Jocko says, discipline is freedom. Right? Discipline is freedom. So when we create this discipline, you're going to actually get the stuff done. So the way I look at it is I'll look ahead to the next day. My mornings are prime time. Okay, mornings, I do not have meetings. I do not have stupid stuff in my mornings. That is blocked off for the most important thing. Again, there's no meetings. There's no ancillary priorities, it's focused on the number one thing. Okay, so when you're thinking about your goals for the week, what's most important? Where do you want to make the most progress, or where are you the most behind on? Put that in the morning. Cancel your meetings. Cancel that coffee with somebody. Cancel all the other stuff, right? Because if you don't make progress on the most important thing, we see this all the time with people publishing books with us. You block the morning for writing if you're in the writing phase. You block the morning for marketing if you're in the marketing phase. Whatever is the bottleneck with getting your book done, with growing your business with a book, like, okay, that is where you need to focus first thing in the morning. So my one rule here is if it doesn't move the needle on your top goal, it doesn't happen in the morning. But once you've done that, now you can look at it and you can say, okay, I'm mapping out my whole day, right? For me, I use Asana. You can use a calendar. I use Asana in my calendar, right? So I'm looking at my calendar and saying, all right, I got a 3-hour block right here. I'm going to make a bunch of progress on that. Looks like I got a couple meetings later in the day. Okay, perfect. Well, I'm going to get this done before those meetings. I'm going to get this done after those meetings. So I know coming in the day what needs to happen, when it needs to happen, if I'm on track. Because I know if I can stack enough of what we call green days in the business, right? No, it's not the band. It's, did you go green for the day, right? If I can win the day, I can win the week. If I can win the week, I can win the month. But if I don't win the day, I don't expect to win any of those other things, right? So what needs to happen throughout that day, planned ahead of time to go green for the day. Now, here's where most people lose. They get distracted by tier 2 tasks. They get distracted by things that don't move the needle. All right. If you're in the early stage of your business, what's the key constraint? It's probably revenue, right? You need to ruthlessly focus on what makes the cash register ring, and everything else is a distraction, right? You've probably heard me talk about there's only, 2 things you should be focused on in your business: getting new customers and making customers happier. Well, if you don't have customers, you don't have a business, you have a business idea, right? So you need to ruthlessly prioritize what's going to move the needle for that. Like if you achieve, let's look at your week, your month, whatever. If you achieve your number 4 and number 5 goal and you miss 1, 2, and 3, well, then guess what that tells me? You didn't ruthlessly prioritize, right? And sometimes we do this almost like as a protectionary mechanism. It's like my number 1 goal, it's kind of uncomfortable. It's going to make me uncomfortable. So let me just focus in my comfort zone on number 4 and 5. It's number 1 for a reason, right? And making the cash register ring, having sales conversations, reaching out to people who can truly help you grow your business, right? That's what's most important, but it's also what's most uncomfortable, right? So this is where you got to ruthlessly prioritize what's going to move the needle, and you got to put it in your mornings, and you got to say no to everything else. And so what I would encourage you to do is to create what I call a stop doing list. And it's all of the things that aren't moving the needle. And so, hey, this isn't moving the needle. This isn't tied to my number 1 goal. And you just need to say no. Say no to hanging out with a friend. Say no to that lunch meeting. Say no to the random coffee with someone who can't help you hit your goals. Because you'll be surprised at what creeps in. All right. And then it's like the rocks and sands analogy. Right? If you don't make time for the rocks and you don't ruthlessly prioritize the rocks, well, then you're not going to have space for them, right? The sand just fills up everything. So again, you've got to ruthlessly prioritize. Okay, I'm double clicking on this. I'm double underlining on this. You've got to ruthlessly prioritize. All right, can you pinky promise me on this? I will ruthlessly prioritize my goals. Because if you miss this point, number 6, I don't care if you do all the other stuff, you're not going to hit it. And this is where most people fall off. So you need to make a list of most important things. That's probably on your weekly list, your daily list, etc. And then get comfortable saying no. All right. It's a 2-letter word that is going to set you free. No. No. Or maybe not yet. If that makes you feel a little bit better, you say, oh man, that's an awesome idea. Let me put this on the later list. Or hey, that's not a great idea. Let me put that on the stop doing list. I'm not doing it. I'm only focused on what moves the needle. So when it comes to goal setting, you need a telescope and a microscope. All right, you need a telescope to look out into the future, and you need a microscope to focus on what's next. Now, most people lean towards one or the other. We all know those people who are just so focused on the telescope that they couldn't execute their way out of a paper bag. But then we also know those people who they look in the microscope so much that they're just walking in circles. All right, so these balance each other. You need the telescope to say, hey, where am I actually going? What's most important? Let's look out far into the future, a year into the future, maybe even more than that. But then the microscope says, hey, what am I doing today, this week, this month to make consistent daily progress? So this system works because it connects your big vision to your daily action, right? So it combines the telescope and the microscope. So we start with the big picture stuff. the yearly intentions, the yearly goals, the reflections. What did we learn? Who do we want to spend more time with? But then, and this is most important, you got to keep that front and center, right? So you need those yearly goals somewhere where you see them every single day. Okay, so one of the big things that I do, and I started doing this a few years ago, is I have my intention and I have my yearly goals. I have it made into a little thing that I hang up on my wall, and it's on my wall in my office right above my computer, right? So when I'm working on my computer, I just look up and I see it, right? So I see my intention for the year, I see my goals for the year, and it's there. Another thing I started doing is I put it as the lock screen on my phone. So anytime I look at my phone, I see my yearly goals. So this works, yes, because it combines the telescope, the microscope, right? It's the long-term vision, it's the short-term execution, but it's visual. The first few years I did this, do not make the same mistake that I did. I went through this grand goal-setting exercise, right? I fill out this doc. I'm super excited. I save the doc to my desktop. I'm like, all right, it's going to be there. Every time I open my computer, I'm going to see this saved doc on my desktop. Guess what happened? About 6 months later, 9 months later, I'm like, man, I haven't looked at that doc all year. Right? Do you think I hit my goals that year? No, right? Because I didn't see them. I didn't see them on a daily basis, right? So everything I'm teaching you here, it's number one, is what works. Right? We have grown for a decade at selfpublishing.com. We've went from 0 to $75 million in sales. We keep growing. We're one of the Inc. 5,000 fastest growing companies. This helped me land on Forbes 30 under 30. This helped me become a millionaire in my 20s. But it happened because I learned all these mistakes the hard way, and then I'm teaching you how to do it correctly in this video. So do this consistently over the next 12 months, over the next few years, and you're going to look up and you're going to realize that you actually hit those goals. And you're going to look around and you're going to have people asking you, how'd you do that? Right? I knew you when you were, you're just like me, and now you're way up there. That's because you implemented this system. I hope this video helped. If it helped, drop a comment. I'd love to hear what's your number one goal right now. And more importantly, how are you breaking it down? I'm going to read every comment, and if you want the template that I use, this is the exact template, I'm going to share it with the top comment on this video. So comment, let me know your number one goal. Top comment, I'll share the template with you, and I'll see you in the next video.